Hey guys, tonight we're rewinding time to an era that had everything. Warlords, wine, economic codependency, and an alarming number of sandals. We're heading into the Bronze Age, right before the world quietly forgot how to function. This isn't a story about one city falling. It's the moment when half the known world hit the uninstalled civilization button all at once. But before we dive into burning palaces and mysterious disappearances, let's appreciate what was there to lose. Because believe it or not, they had their act together. Sort of so. Before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if slow, unsettling collapses are your thing. Let me know in the comments what time it is, where you're watching from, and maybe keep a cup of barley beer nearby, just for historical ambience. Now dim the lights. Maybe crack a window for that faint, apocalyptic breeze, and let's step softly into tonight's story. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1300 BCE, in the glorious sandal-squeaking heart of the late Bronze Age. The world, your world, is surprisingly globalized for something so dusty. Empires rise and fall, but right now, things are humming, a little too smoothly. Let's meet the neighbors. First up, Mycenaean Greece. Think of it as ancient Greece on hard mode. Bronze armor, booming fortresses, and a royal class of growling warrior kings who settle political debates with spears. They're like if Homer's Iliad were a lifestyle blog. These are the guys who supposedly took Troy, worshipped angry sky, gods, and wrote in Linear B, which looks like cuneiform had a breakdown. They love gold, long swords, and cataloging livestock on clay tablets. They're also very good at building large walls and absolutely terrible at staying alive in the next chapter. Next door are the Hittites. High in the Anatolian highlands, imagine bureaucrats with war chariots. They're efficient, intimidating, and write treaties with the same level of passion you'd find in a slow divorce proceeding. They run a tight ship, taxes, diplomacy, endless cuneiform, and the occasional execution just to remind people who's in charge. They call their king my son, and frankly, he behaves like one distant, hot-tempered, and very capable of burning you to death. Further south, still basking in the long afterglow of pyramid grandeur, are the Egyptians. By this point in their new kingdom era, more temples, more gods, more islands. Egypt is aging gracefully, like a rich relative who still insists they knew Tutankhamun personally. Their economy runs on grain, gossip, and state-sponsored labor. They've got diplomats everywhere, statues of everything, and enough bureaucratic scrolls to choke a crocodile. Also, their letters to other kings read like passive-aggressive Yelp reviews. Hovering in the shadows are the Assyrians, not quite at full nightmare strength yet, but sharpening their claws. These are the future overachievers of brutality, currently doing a bit of soul-searching in northern Mesopotamia. For now, they're minor players. Give them time. Then we've got the Canaanites, the Levantine middlemen who live between everyone and somehow profit from it. They don't conquer, they connect. Their cities Ugarit, Byblos, and Friends are busy little hubs of commerce. Picture harbor towns full of scribes, traders, and multilingual toddlers. They're the ones shipping purple dye, alphabet prototypes, and bronze parts to everyone else. They'll suffer greatly later, but right now, they're absolutely thriving. And finally, let's raise a pottery shard in memory of the Minoans. Once the stars of the Aegean, all art, plumbing, and complex mythology, now reduced to a cautionary tale about putting too much faith in volcanoes. Their influence lingers. In frescoes, bull-leaping legends, and eerie, undeciphered scripts. All these civilizations are locked together in a delicate web of trade and diplomacy, bound by boats, bureaucrats, and bronze. Bronze, by the way, isn't just a pretty alloy. It's power. It's how you make weapons, tools, and status symbols. But bronze requires tin, and tin is hard to find, imported from far-off lands, packed on the backs of donkeys and boats like the precious metal it is. So everything runs on long-distance relationships. Egypt needs Levantine timber. Greece needs Cypriot copper. The Hittites need grain or gold, or whatever they're arguing over this decade. They send letters, actual international correspondence, written on clay tablets in cuneiform, sealed and delivered across hundreds of miles. Dear Pharaoh, thank you for the gold statue. We'll sacrifice a goat in your honor. It's a functioning, if unstable, system. There are wars, yes, but there are also embassies, gifts, treaties, and marriages. Everyone's trying to act civilized. Mostly, the palace is the center of everything. These are palace economies, not free markets. The king hoards the wealth, redistributes grain, keeps tabs on sheep and beer. Picture a DMV crossed with a god complex. Scribes run the show. Grain goes in, tablets come out. Every sandal issued is recorded. Every goat that dies gets logged. And if the palace burns, the system dies with it. So yes, the late Bronze Age is impressive, expansive, interconnected, comfortable if you're elite, bearable if you're lucky. But take a step back. Listen, there's a creak in the beams. A faint grinding sound in the gears of empire. Somewhere, a courier is late. A harvest is short. A tin shipment never arrives. The world hasn't collapsed yet, but the ground is shifting, quietly, and history has entered its villain arc. Let's start with the palace economy, the very heartbeat of Bronze Age civilization. It's an elegant system. On paper, the king owns everything: land, livestock, people. You work, the palace writes it down, and if you're lucky, you get a ration of barley and a pat on the back. There's no free market, no haggling merchants shouting prices, just scribes with styluses, tablets, and a lifetime of carpal tunnel. If the king says you're a brewer, you brew. If you're a goat herder, you herd. If you're an unpaid temple intern, you spend 6 years cataloging lentils and wondering when you became a statistic. Everything flows through the palace. All food, all resources, all sandals. You don't own your grain. You borrow it back from the institution that took it from you in the first place. It's central planning meets divine right meets whoops. We forgot to plan for failure, and it all works beautifully. Until it dots now. Let's add the climate to this fragile little setup. Spoiler, the weather isn't here to help. Somewhere between 1250 and 1150 BCE, the skies go from moody to downright vindictive. Drought creeps across the eastern Mediterranean, crops fail, rivers shrink. The fields crack open like tired knuckles. No one knows exactly why. Maybe volcanic eruptions, maybe El Niño, maybe the gods got bored. But the result is the same. Famine, dust, and awkward temple prayers that go unanswered. You're a farmer. Your barley field died 2 weeks ago. Your goat looks at you like it wants to unionize. Your children chew on bark with quiet resignation. And the tax collector still wants his share. You walk to the palace with an empty sack and a full list of complaints. In return, they give you a tablet. A lovely little clay tablet with a cuneiform note that reads, "Pending approval." Meanwhile, the elites are doing fine, better than fine. They're drinking date wine from imported jars, wearing perfumed linens, and enjoying elaborate funerals that cost more than most families earn in a lifetime. Class tension is bubbling. The palace throws feasts while peasants boil shoe leather and call it stew. Discontent isn't loud, not yet, but it simmers, and because we're in the late Bronze Age, there's no such thing as a peaceful protest. There's just work, starvation, or wandering into the wilderness hoping the wolves are having an off day. Bread riots. Oh, they're coming. Just without the bread. Let's meet the average Bronze Age peasant, shall we? You wake up on a mat that smells like old onions and wet goats. You pull on your single tunic, patched 17 times and still damp from last. Week's thunderstorm, your sandals, made of reused rope and optimism. Your hands, blistered, cracked, and permanently stained the color of sadness. Your breakfast, if you're lucky, a few lentils. If you're really lucky, a fig that hasn't shriveled into a raisin of disappointment. You walk 10 miles to the field, hoe in one hand, existential dread in the other. You sow barley that probably won't sprout and pray the rats are full from eating the archives instead. There is no retirement plan, just the comforting knowledge that when you collapse in the field, the scribes will record it under miscellaneous. Back in the palace, over-centralization is the name of the game. Every single function, food, defense, trade, religion is managed from the same bloated hub. There's a warehouse stacked with jars of grain and amphorae of oil, guarded by underpaid men with splinters in their morale. A single scribe, probably, sleep-deprived and battling his 4th case of lice, is responsible for recording the monthly pig count, the annual ox rental rates, and something about spear repairs. And when that scribe gets sick, or the warehouse burns down, or the delivery from Cyprus mysteriously vanishes, the entire empire hiccups. No backup plans. No decentralized systems. Just a heavily perfumed noble screaming, "Where's my incense shipment?" into the void. Archaeologists have actually uncovered dozens of tablets from this period filled with urgent supply requests. The ancient version of spam emails. Dear Palace, we are out of barley, again. Dear Temple, please send wool, and a miracle. Dear anyone, there are raiders outside, and our door is missing. Please advise. And when your economy is built entirely on these frantic clay post-it notes, it's only a matter of time before the whole thing collapses under its own absurd weight. Because nothing says resilient civilization like 12 identical tablets about emergency barley distribution. We've talked about palaces cracking and harvests failing, about tired scribes and hungry peasants and missing tin shipments. But now, something new shows up on the horizon. Something loud, smoky, and deeply confusing. They didn't send invitations. They didn't explain themselves. They didn't even leave a travel itinerary. Because one day, quite suddenly, people came from the sea, or near the sea, or possibly through the sea. And just like that, the Bronze Age started coughing up blood. So, the sea, peoples. That's the name we gave them, not the name they gave themselves. Their PR team was non-existent. Their documentation habits were abysmal. They left behind no memoir, no burned tablets, not even a modest blog post saying, "Hi, sorry about your empire." Just scattered weapons, broken cities, and confused survivors. And it wasn't just one attack. This wasn't a band of pirates swinging by for lunch. It was waves of chaos, coordinated, relentless, and weirdly efficient. Ugarit, gone. Hatti, incinerated. Mycenae, collapsing. Cyprus, torched the Levant. burning like an unattended barley field. Even Egypt, who usually handles things with chariots and curses, barely survives. And not for lack of trying. Let's build the suspense, shall we? It's the early 12th century BCE. You're living in a bustling harbour town on the coast of what's now Syria. Maybe you're a scribe. Maybe you sell fish. Maybe you just stand around and gossip. You wake to the smell of smoke, thick and wrong. The kind that says something bigger than a hearth fire has gone terribly sideways. You run to the shore and see boats, dozens of them. Long, lean, low to the water. They don't carry goods, they carry people. Strangers, armed, armored, sunburned and unsmiling. They don't want to trade. They don't want to talk. They want everything by the time the sun is fully up. Your granary's on fire. Your temple's been looted. Your goat, the one you've raised since it was small and unreasonable, is fleeing into the ash-stained hills. Children cry, dogs bark. The streets are red and sticky. Your neighbors are gone. And when the sea peoples leave, they don't stick around to govern. They don't install a puppet king. They don't even bother with a farewell note. They vanish as quickly as they came. And the wildest part, we still don't know who they were. Historians have theories, of course. Let's walk through them like bedtime riddles, whispered in the quiet ruin of a fallen port city. Migrants, fleeing drought and famine. Their own lands failed, so they came for yours. Mercenaries, once hired by the very kingdoms they're now destroying. Underpaid, overarmed, and out of patience. Exiled warriors, veterans of too many wars, with nowhere left to go but forward. Alliances of desperation, forged between displaced tribes, rebellious peasants, and the kinds of people who sharpen bronze, just to feel something. Or maybe just vengeful exormates of collapsing empires, the kind who show up late and loud to your housewarming, set fire to your rugs, and leave through the back door. Egypt tried to fight them. Ramesses III, eternal overachiever of dramatic wall carvings, claims victory. His records show strange enemies with horned helmets, ox-driven wagons, and ships so stylized they look like floating crescent moons. He called them by names: Peleset, Lucca, Shekelesh. It's unclear whether those were tribes, job descriptions, or insults. But even if Egypt won, it didn't walk away untouched. The economy staggered, trade routes withered, temples went broke. Even Pharaoh's dinner got downgraded from wine to watery beer. Victory, yes, but the kind where the house is still on fire behind you. And this wasn't a one-and-done invasion. It was a chain reaction. The sea peoples didn't just destroy cities. They disrupted everything between cities. Merchants stopped sailing. Farmers fled their fields. Diplomats stopped writing. Caravans vanished. Borders meant nothing. They didn't just burn the map. They tore up the idea of a map. The real terror wasn't that they came. It's that no one could stop them. Because by the time the sea peoples reached your city, your local palace was already in crisis. The scribes were overworked. The granaries were underfilled. The army was mostly hypothetical. It was the perfect storm. Internal weakness meets external disaster. And in the end, it didn't matter who they were. Only that they were everyone's problem. So yes, the sea peoples remain a mystery. An unsolved riddle carved into the walls of a dying age. Were they heroes? Villains? Climate refugees with a grudge? We'll likely never know. All that remains are ruins and stories. Stories of flames licking the sky. Of ships without flags. Of goats screaming into the dust. and the silence that followed after the last boat drifted away, because in the Bronze Age, endings didn't come with closure. They came with fire and then nothing. The smoke hasn't cleared yet, and in the distance, another city is burning. No scribes rush to record it. No runners carry word of its fall. No gods intervene. Just the crackle of timber, the collapse of walls, the faint thud of sandals on ash. The palaces, once symbols of divine order, economic control, and the occasional decorative ostrich feather, are crumbling. Not metaphorically, literally. Literally, roofs sag, courtyards cave in, walls blister from flame and time, and with them goes the system. Because when a Bronze Age palace collapses, it doesn't just take the local nobles with it. It takes the records, the ration lists, the scribal classes, the redistribution networks, the granary guards, and the intern responsible for counting jars of olive oil. Suddenly, the scribe who once logged your daily barley portion has stopped showing up. The tablets go unwritten. The grain doesn't arrive. The temple doors stay closed. And worst of all, you've got no one to complain to. We know this part of the story, not from triumphant epics or recovered manifestos, but from silence. In places like Ugarit, excavations uncovered letters still waiting in the outbox. One desperate message from a coastal city pleads for help. The enemy ships are already here. The city is burning. Where are you? No one replied. That clay tablet never made it out of the palace. It survived only because the building collapsed around it, baking it into permanence like some tragic bureaucratic casserole in the palace system. Writing meant everything. Not for poetry, for inventory. You want to eat. You need a tablet. You need a tablet. Want a tunic? There's a form for that. You want to bury your uncle? That'll require 3 signatures and a dried fish offering. So when the palace is gone, writing dies, and with it, memory, history, continuity. Entire cultures forget how to read their own language. Scripts like Linear B, Akkadian, cuneiform, and hieroglyphic shorthand vanish, not because they were outlawed, but because no one's left to teach them. Imagine being a farmer who used to haul grain to the local warehouse every week, trading your harvest for tools, cloth, and the occasional sip of state-sanctioned wine. Now the warehouse is a blackened ruin. The scribes are missing, and the guards have stolen all the donkeys. You stare at the empty doorway, holding your bag of barley like a ghost with nowhere to haunt, no system, no instructions, no one to tell you what comes next. The collapse wasn't instant. Some cities tried to hold on. Egypt fought. Assyria went quiet, then regrouped. Cyprus tried to rebuild, but most centers of power simply blinked out like candles in a drafty hallway, and the people, they scattered. Some became refugees, joining migrating tribes or roving bands of former soldiers. Others dug in, becoming isolated farmers, hunters, or local warlords. The rest, the ones trapped in falling cities, were buried under clay, soot, and irrelevance. This isn't just the end of kings. It's the end of complexity, the end of professional scribes with styluses carved from bone, the end of mass pottery stamped with palace seals, the end of trading tin from Afghanistan to Cyprus like it's the Bronze Age. Version of Amazon Prime. Gone are the royal storehouses, the diplomatic letters, the merchant fleets, the traveling entertainers, the embroidered sandals of the Mycenaean court. Nothing remains but fragments of frescoes, of teeth, of cities where everything depended on a central office that no longer exists. And it wasn't just the physical destruction. It was the emotional silence that followed. Imagine waking each day to see the ruins of a city that once controlled your world, and no one explains what happened. No kings send reassurance. No priests deliver interpretations. No elders speak with authority, just hunger, confusion. You eat what you can grow, sleep in what you can salvage, work with what's left, chipped axes, broken tools, half-buried ruins where the goats refuse to go. You hear rumors of ships, of raiders, of vanished towns, but no one knows who or why. The world used to be wide, organized, connected. Now it's small, brutal, local. There's a phrase often found in the clay letters of the late Bronze Age. There is famine in your house. There is famine in our house. And in the final generation, the letters stop saying anything at all. No famine reported. No shipments delayed. No copper requested. Just silence. Some cities burned. Others decayed slowly, like fruit left on a windowsill. A few tried to hold on, but there were no more networks to belong to. No more foreign grain convoys. No more temples receiving shipments from 3 kingdoms away. The palaces are ruins. The letters are ash. The scribes are bones in a pit. And the goats, they've adapted better than anyone. So now the question shifts. What do you do after the system fails? Because in the next chapter, we'll meet the survivors, the scavengers, the stubborn few who remember what the world was, and try to build something new with the scraps. Not a rebirth, not yet. Just a long, quiet pause in history, filled with broken walls and unanswered prayers. The palaces are gone, the letters have stopped. The cities, once humming with scribes, merchants, nobles, and the odd, dangerously pampered goat, are silent. And what comes next isn't conquest, or rebellion, or even rebuilding. It's something much quieter, much stranger, survival. Not the cinematic kind. No stirring music, no chosen one. Just the grinding, bitter reality of staying alive when the entire world has forgotten how to function. Daily life, if you can call it that, has gone. Feral, the fields are cracked. The rain doesn't come when it should. The soil, overworked by generations of palace quotas and barley obsession, now gives back almost nothing. Crops sprout, wilt, and die like they're just as tired as everyone else. People start to move. Not in armies, in clusters. Families with nothing left pick up what they can carry, a pot, a child, a few scraps of grain, and start walking to where? Anywhere, away from the ruins, away from the hunger elites. Once the shining heads of the system vanish. Some are killed, some run, others simply stop mattering. A noble without a palace is just a well-moisturized peasant. And the peasants, they keep working. Of course they do. The system collapses. The gods go quiet, and still someone has to chase. The goats. Someone has to dig for wild onions. Someone has to boil bark and call it soup. You wake before dawn. Not because of duty, there's no overseer anymore, but because the cold jolts you from sleep. You're wrapped in a blanket that used to belong to your uncle, now patched with plant fibers and something you sincerely hope isn't rat fur. Your home, a mud brick hovel the size of a generous coffin. You've rebuilt it 3 times. It leaks every time it rains and collapses every 3rd winter. But it's yours. Sort of. Breakfast is not a meal. It's something hot and wet, ladled from a cracked clay bowl that predates your memory. A thin broth of weeds, bark, maybe a handful of lentils if you're having a lucky famine. The spoon is made of bone. The firewood is damp. Your hands shake, your back aches, and the day hasn't even started yet. Pottery, once painted with myths, gods, and scandalous bulls, is now lumpy and depressing. Gone are the elegant calyxes and amphorae shaped for wine and oil. Now it's all rough, asymmetrical bowls, fired poorly, if at all, functional, ugly, sad. You can see the collapse in the clay dot architecture too. Houses used to have courtyards, drainage systems, even modest attempts at insulation. Now it's one. Huts slapped together with wet dirt and vague optimism. Roofs sag, doors creak. Floors are just dry patches of disappointment. And writing. What writing? Entire regions go silent. In some places, no one reads, no one writes. No one even remembers what the script looked like. Not because it was outlawed, because it was irrelevant. What good is a written contract when there's no one left to enforce it? What's the use of poetry when your neighbors are eating snails and arguing over a dead sheep? Children are born now who've never seen a city, never known a king, never tasted imported wine or heard the low hum of a harbor full of foreign ships. Their world is smaller, dirtier, hungrier. Ask them what bronze is, and they'll stare at you blankly while chewing boiled root. Ask them about flushing toilets, and they'll assume you're describing some kind of divine magic, a clay pipe that carries waste out of the house. Witchcraft, running water, blasphemy, sewage systems, royal lies, the wonders of civilization are now bedtime stories, if anyone bothers with stories at all. In some regions, people forget how to make things, not just complex objects, even the basics. How to build a wagon, how to tan leather, how to shape a wheel properly. The knowledge isn't destroyed, it's just misplaced, left in a burned temple or a buried archive, forgotten one unrecorded generation at a time. A boy asks his grandfather how to make a plow. The grandfather shrugs. His father died in a raid. The neighbors are gone. No one taught him, so they lash a crooked stick to an ox and hope it scratches the soil enough to trick it into giving back something edible. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it dones single quotes. And yet people endure, not triumphantly, not beautifully, but stubbornly. They stitch clothes from scraps. They make glue from bones. They sing songs no one remembers the origins of. Around fires no one has the strength to properly tend. They bury their dead in shallow graves and move on. They nurse their sick with herbs and half-remembered prayers. They name their children after seasons, animals, and whatever gods haven't disappointed them yet. The world didn't end. It just lowered the difficulty settings to hell and said, "Good luck." And the people, with cracked lips and hollow stomachs, said, "Fine, we'll keep going." Because when civilization fails, humanity doesn't vanish. It limps, it scratches, it builds fires from the ruins. It finds a way to be miserable, but alive. Next, we look at what rises from this long, slow suffering, the kingdoms that crawl out of the ash, but they don't remember what the Bronze Age was. They just know something big died, and now it's up to them to pretend they know how to be civilized again. By the time most of the Bronze Age world is a smoking memory, one kingdom is still upright, technically. Egypt. The temples still cast long shadows over the Nile. The priests still chant. The bureaucrats still stamp things. Somewhere, someone is still drawing a falcon-headed god on a wall with perfect proportions. But don't let the monuments fool you. Egypt didn't escape the collapse. It just survived it louder, and barely. Ramesses III, the pharaoh with the energy of someone constantly trying to reschedule the apocalypse, does what few can. He beats back the sea peoples. His inscriptions are dramatic, full of ships, spears, chaos, and triumphant declarations. He even draws the sea people's wagons and women, which is either respectful ethnography or a flex. He claims total victory. And to be fair, he's not entirely lying. But victory comes at a cost. A heavy, splintering, pyramid-sized cost. The economy cracks, trade dies, timber from Lebanon, gone, copper from Cyprus, a fantasy, tin from the east, might as well be on Mars, suddenly. Egypt, land of gold, gods, and grain, is bartering with itself. Grain for sandals, linen for beer. Priests arguing over inventories like supermarket clerks during a blackout. And without trade, the central government starts to shrivel. Corruption blooms. Officials skim from grain shipments. Regional governors become miniature pharaohs with egos. An unpaid staff. The Nile floods, but not enough to wash away the quiet decay crawling through the palace walls. Even the tombs, sacred, sealed, eternal, are no longer safe. Grave robbers flourish. Some are desperate locals. Others are disgruntled former workers. A few are guards who were supposed to be preventing robberies. They break in, smash sarcophagi, steal gold and linen and anything vaguely saleable. Pharaohs once buried with divine splendor now lie exposed, stripped, forgotten. Their names slowly erased by time and thieves. And then there's the workers, in the village of Daya el-Medina. The artisans who build tombs in the Valley of the Kings do something radical. Something almost unheard of in ancient history. They go on strike. They stop working, sit in the sun, and demand to be paid. Not in silver. In bread. Their protest is simple, brutal, and honest. We are hungry. We have no clothing. We have no oil. We have no fish. It's the first recorded labor strike in history. Not for glory. Not for revolution. Just to not starve. Meanwhile, outside the valley, Egypt's world is shrinking. The vast trade routes that once funneled luxuries and war chariots across continents are now overgrown goat paths and haunted ruins. Once, a merchant could sail from Ugarit to Thebes with glass beads and incense. Now he gets halfway downriver and gets robbed by 6 guys with clubs and no concept of international law. The great bronze world, with its embassies, treaties, and conveniently labeled storage jars, has collapsed into dust and banditry. The Nile still flows, but the world it once connected doesn't. And so Egypt becomes a haunted echo of itself, still alive, still reciting its own greatness, still building temples, albeit smaller, sadder ones, still mummifying its dead, though with cheaper linen and suspiciously recycled amulets. The art remains beautiful. The language still flows like reeds in the wind. The gods are honored. The rituals continue. But it's thin, like a grandparent wearing old medals at a birthday no one remembered to attend. Imagine a once mighty civilization sitting in a collapsing chair, muttering about the good old days while the termites take notes. That's Egypt in the 11th century BCE. They remember how things used to be, when ships lined the ports, when envoys from Hatti brought gifts and flattery, when scribes had ink and patience. Now a king receives no letters. The ports are empty. The scribes copy old texts because no one's producing anything new. Even time itself seems stuck. Pharaohs are named after old ones, copying titles like expired brand labels. Ramesses this, Ramesses that, each a slightly dimmer photocopy, and yet they endure, because that's what Egypt does. It doesn't innovate, it doesn't flee, it doesn't panic. It endures. While others fall into obscurity, Egypt slouches into a kind of eternal twilight. A kingdom of sacred routines, dusty shrines, and memories too heavy to carry. Even when the power is gone, the symbolism lingers. The ankh, the eye, the crook and flail, held by kings who rule over less and less, watched by gods who answer fewer. Prayers eventually, foreign powers creep in, Libyans, Nubians, later Assyrians. But that's another story. For now, Egypt remains, bent, hollowed, clutching its rituals like a cloak against the cold, still calling itself divine. Even as the walls crack and the grain runs out, still claiming to be the center of the world, long after the world has stopped looking, because in the post-collapse world, survival is its own kind of miracle. The Bronze Age didn't end with a bang. No final battle, no climactic speech, no epic collapse scored by orchestras and collapsing marble columns. It ended with silence, an awkward, confusing silence, one that stretched not for weeks or months, but for centuries, across the ancient world. Cities were abandoned like half-finished thoughts, palaces once echoing with scribes, priests, and the delicate clink of ceremonial goblets stood empty, their great halls blackened by fire, their records crumbled to powder. No kings to command, no messengers to announce, no messengers to announce, no merchants with foreign goods or gossip, just wind and sand, and walls slowly losing the will to stand. The writing systems vanished first. Linear B, cuneiform, Hittite, hieroglyphs. They had been the lifeblood of palace economies, recording shipments of wine, deliveries of barley, diplomatic marriages, and how many goats were owed for temple maintenance on alternating Thursdays. But when the scribes died or fled, their scripts died with them. No one translated them. No one even tried. For hundreds of years, entire regions existed in complete illiteracy. Whole generations passed without writing a single word. Imagine being born in the ruins of a literate world, sleeping beside shattered tablets, walking paths, once measured by geometry, drinking from cups no one could label anymore, and never knowing what any of it meant. The cities faded, not just as places, but as concepts. No sewer systems, no imported dyes, no planned markets, no fountains, no street grids. Even architecture itself devolved once. Walls stood straight. Stones were carved to fit. Temples aligned with the stars now. Mud bricks, thatched roofs, round huts slapped together in valleys once ruled by kings. The average home became a shrug of a structure's shelter. Barely and myths great, sprawling. Myths crumbled, too. The stories that once linked kingdoms justified rule, and explained why the Nile flooded, or why the harvest failed, they frayed. Some were lost, others shrank, retold around fires by people who didn't quite remember the endings. They became bedtime ghost stories, about golden ages no one believed in anymore. But for all that vanished, not everything was lost. Something did survive. Not glory, not empire. People, refugees, wandered, farmers dug in, shepherds moved to the highlands, artisans bartered scraps of skill, old men remembered how to build a wheel, grandmothers taught lullabies in forgotten tongues, Children played with the bones of collapsed civilizations, unaware they were playing in tombs. Little by little, life reassembled itself, unevenly, clumsily, stubbornly, in backwater villages. Oral traditions held on like moss between stones, names of gods whispered during storms, rituals practiced without context, just in case, songs that meant something, though no one remembered what history turned into a game of telephone. Passed hand to hand, word to ear, distorted, fragmented, alive. Some communities never rebuilt cities. They lived without palaces, without kings, without male roots or scribes. And strangely, they managed. The collapse had taught them a lesson. The palaces never learned. Don't put all your faith in complexity, because when the networks fell, the simple villages, the ones with no temples, no bureaucrats, and no illusions of immortality, kept going. They had no elite class to hoard. Grain dot, no diplomatic marriages to sour, no embassies to go unanswered, just dirt, goats, fire, rain, enough to survive, not enough to fall apart. Sometimes, civilization just stops returning your messages. The gods stop sending omens. The palace doesn't reply. The roads grow quiet. You wait. You wonder, you give up, and you begin again. Eventually, slowly, something new stirs in the dust. Not a revival, not a resurrection, but a reinvention. In the Levant, the Phoenicians begin sailing again, whispering to the sea that it's time to reopen the world. They create a new alphabet, one anyone can learn. Not just scribes. In the highlands, the Assyrians sharpen their blades and start reorganizing colder, harder, more efficient than ever. In a rocky, divided land called Greece, villagers start gathering into something new. City-states. They borrow pieces of the past and write strange new epics about forgotten heroes, Odysseus, Achilles, names that might once have been whispered around a dying campfire in the ruins of Mycenae even. The Hebrews, wanderers and exiles, begin to write their stories down. Their God, unlike the old gods, had not fallen with the palaces. He followed them into exile by 900 BCE. The world is not restored, but it has restarted, smaller, harder, a bit wiser. The Iron Age begins, not with triumphant trumpets, but with a nervous shuffle. New powers rise. New scripts form. New myths are born. But something has changed. People remember, dimly, uneasily, that greatness is not permanent, that cities can fall, that kings can be forgotten, that time can go missing for a few hundred years and no one will file a report. The Bronze Age was brilliant. It gave us writing, trade, diplomacy, monumental architecture, art, music, and organized laundry, probably. But it was also brittle, over-centralized, dependent on fragile lines of tin and trust. And when it broke, it didn't shatter cleanly, it crumbled. And in the quiet that followed, people endured. They sat in the dust, gnawed on bitter roots, and told stories about golden times they never really understood. And somehow, that was enough. History is not a straight line. Sometimes it lurches, sometimes it stalls, sometimes it forgets how to walk, but it never stops. Entirely, civilizations fall, people endure, and sometimes, in the quiet, they begin again. So that was the Bronze Age collapse, a time when the world didn't explode. It just forgot how to function. If you made it this far, thank you for sticking around. Feel free to leave a comment, tell me where you're listening from, or just say hi. And if you'd like to join me again for more quiet collapses, Strange empires and forgotten worlds. You can subscribe, but only if you actually want to. No pressure. This isn't a palace economy. Until next time, sleep well, dream of shipwrecked empires, and remember, even when civilizations fall, people find a way to keep going. Good night.